7:00 p.m. on Thursday. Welcome to Leap Day 2024. It's always said on a leap day, you have to do something you've never experienced before. And while I hope you've experienced this show before, in case you haven't, this is your Leap Day submission into doing something you've never done before. Welcome in to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show exclusively on the Better Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman. You follow me on the X at Eric Balkman. Connect with me there if you don't. I'm the host of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the Road of His High Stakes Lowdown. And of course, you know me from the FFPC, the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Pleased to welcome in my co-host this evening. You know him from analytics of dynasty.com. You hear his voice on the Dynasty Think Tank. Follow the Dynasty Think Tank on X at Dino Think Tank. And follow this guy on the X at McNamara Dynasty, the attorney to the stars and the fantasy football lawyer himself. Jordan McNamara, we're talking Dynasty tonight. Welcome in, man. So good to have you back on the show.
It's good to be back. I was navigating a court appearance. Like, I got to get out of here. I have a hard 7:00 appointment I got to be at. I didn't tell him exactly what it was, but I made it here. So glad to be here. Good to see you.
That's fine. Listen, drug charges, that stuff can kind of wait. Like, we got to figure out what we're doing with rookies. We have to figure out what we're doing with our dynasty teams. And I think as we get into like sort of a soft open here, Jordan, we'll get into basically on the show tonight. We're going to get into what's going on around the NFL. We're going to find out where Jordan stands on certain players for dynasty. I want to get into some rookie talk tonight. Not necessarily on player analysis, but what you should be doing knowing that these rookies are in the draft this year and how to maximize your dynasty assets prior to the rookie drafts that are coming up in a couple of months here. And then I want to get into the analytics of dynasty team building guide, something that Jordan has put out year after year. And there's something a little bit different this year and maybe a lot bit different. We'll get into that before we call it a night here tonight. As a reminder, the 2024 FFPC Fantasy Pros Championship is live. It is a $1 million grand prize in a $6 million prize pool, and you can start drafting live or slow drafts at myffpc.com. Myffpc.com is where to play in the never too early best ball tournaments too. You know, you think about all these rookies that are out there right now. They don't have teams yet, but you can still draft them. $125 entry fee will win you a $25,000 grand prize in the classic Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. If you want to play Superflex, you can do that as well. Just a $35 entry fee, a $10,000 grand prize is there. No kickers or defenses in this 14-week regular season. We crown champs after week 17. And you can draft a 30-second clock, a 60-second clock, a 2-hour clock, or a 6-hour clock. Those are all available at myffpc.com. And don't forget, if you're playing Dynasty, and listen, if you're watching this show tonight, you're probably playing Dynasty. Plenty of Dynasty orphans have had their team entry fees lowered for 2024, some as low as $1. Sign up for those. Register now at myffpc.com and play fantasy football 365 days a year. And Jordan, I don't think I'm going to get any pushback from you. Playing Dynasty Fantasy Football, where you can wake up in the morning, you pour your coffee, you check in on your phone or on your computer, and you see how many trade offers you have. It's the best part of fantasy football is playing it January through December every single year.
Yeah, it's funny because I tell people what I do, and they're like, "Oh, it must be nice in the off season." And I was like, "Actually, this is like the busiest time of year." I was like, you got the combine, you got free agency, the draft, and then it'll calm down a little bit. But this stretch run is where it's at. And if you're into fantasy football, I mean, we spend so much time on it, and that's I think how a lot of people get into Dynasty. You spend so much time in it from May through December, right? You just might as well roll it over for the first third of the year as well. So it's definitely a great game.
It's fantastic. And I can't remember exactly the year we introduced Dynasty Fantasy Football with the FFPC, but it's probably been over 10 years now. I don't know how many thousands of leagues we've had, and we've never had a league fold, which is fantastic, which is what you always want to see. And I think, and I do want to get into this real briefly just before, because there's so much stuff to be done with veterans right now rather than rookies. I know we all have rookie fever right now here, Jordan, but when you consider the NFL Combine that's going on right now, when you look at the numbers, relative athletic score, 40s, bench press, 3-cone drill, shuttle, whatever it is, how closely do you pay attention to those metrics after the Combine's over? And maybe after the NFL draft's over, when you look at what these guys did at the Combine, how important are those metrics into trying to figure out how successful these rookies are going to be in the pros?
So that's a great question. My answer to that would be, I think that NFL line performance predicts draft position, but conditioned on the draft position being the same, I don't think the athleticism matters. So what I mean by that is, if you have 2 first-round wide receivers and one ran 4.31 and the other one ran 4.49, I don't think the athleticism matters, right? It matters because it got the 4.31 guy into the first round. I don't think it doesn't. And there's been a lot of studies to suggest that athleticism, especially at receiver, doesn't matter in round, right? As it's not predictive of performance. So, and that backs up with like draft pedigree as well. You would think that earlier in the round, that like if you look at the data there, it's not really predictive the way you would expect that to be. It's predictive. The round itself is predictive, but not the order in the round. So I think that's a thing to think about when, if you get into May and you're in a rookie draft and you're like, well, this guy ran 4.41 and he's going a little bit higher than this guy at 4.5, at 4.53. Well, that must be the guy at 4.4, and running the 4.4 is better, right? You should definitely sort of take that with a huge grain of salt, because that has historically not been a good factor.
In your experience in looking at dynasty rookies and things that have been predictive, what is there a metric that you look at, or maybe a couple of metrics that you look at, like, okay, this is the numbers coming out of college for this guy, this is what this guy did in college, this has, like, this specific thing, whether it's dominator rating or whatever it is, I don't want to get into it, but has there been one that you trust maybe more so than others?
You're talking about receiver?
Let's start with receiver.
Sure.
And then we can branch off into other positions. But receiver for sure, because this is a really good receiver class.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the way I treat receivers is I let, and you were like, do you want to do some individual rookies? And I was like, no, I haven't studied that, right? And that's part of my thing is I wait a very, very long time to study rookies, because I let the NFL do the hard work for me. Right. And again, like a lot of things that I've found in my research has been like the order in a round doesn't matter. Right. Some of those other things that you would have thought mattered, they aren't really predictive of success. And so I keep coming back to, there's a lot of randomness in it, and I'm not sure spending a ton of time on it breaks those ties. I think so this is a great question in terms of like, just like, give me 2 or 3 things to kind of look at. Is basically really how I look at this point of the year. What their breakout age was, I think really matters. So you can look at basically the first time they cross a dominator rating of 20. And dominator rating, for those not familiar, it's the percentage of your team's touchdowns that you had in a given season, plus the percentage of your team's receiving yards you had in a season divided by 2, right? It's those 2 things combined. And so anytime you get over 20, that's kind of your initial breakout. Over 30 is really where you want to get. But I look at that first time someone gets over 20, and if that's before they turn 20 years old, that's a good sign. Right, that's usually a pretty good sign. And you want them first and second rounds, right? You don't want to take a lot of later wide receivers. So it kind of becomes very much of a paring down for me of, I don't want to take a lot of guys unless they're discounts at receiver.
Couldn't you make the case that quarterbacks and receivers are the positions you want to focus on early in like a super flex dynasty rookie draft? And then, tight ends and running backs, I think what's interesting about them is, running backs, you obviously want to get them at the front of their career. Tight ends, if they're good, you're going to have a long career with them, right? But I think like running backs, well, I don't know. Maybe tight ends you need to focus on early too. But I feel like in my rookie drafts, some of my rookie drafts go 10 rounds, Jordan. And I'm like, I'm just taking stabs on day 3 guys just to see, what happens with them in training camp, what happens with them in preseason or what have you. Because I think that's the most volatile position, opportunity being the most important part of that position. How do you view, quarterback, running back, and tight end sort of in a dynasty rookie landscape, the positions themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I lean premium positions I lean premium players at premium positions, right? I'm looking for elite players, and if I'm not getting elite players, I'm looking at premium positions and kind of leaning there, right? So, in your super flex drafts, you want to be thinking about quarterback. And it might even be like, if you're sitting at 103 this year, the answer might not be quarterback to select a quarterback. It might be, let's trade the pick for a quarterback, right? It might be that, right? So I wouldn't necessarily sit and think, hey, I'm obliged to make this pick at this position. You might be able to say, hey, I can use this asset to really kind of address a position out in the marketplace, right? So that's one way I think about it. I think generally I don't draft day 3 wide receivers. I think Puka Nacua is going to trick a lot of people, right? If you actually look at the median score for round 4 through 7 wide receivers this year on a per game basis, it was like 2.2 points per game, right? So again, like there's a vast majority of those are never going to be productive. I think people get baited into, oh, we saw Puka Nacua, we've seen Tyreek Hill. Like those are once every handful of years type of outcomes, right, for receivers. So I'm generally cautious on that. But you do get it at running back, right? And that's the thing that's interesting. Like you get the Kyren Williams goes supernova, and that changes dynasty leagues, right? Yeah. And that's a story that's like not, and if you just had hit the running back position like the past couple of years and just hit it, you would have gotten, Kyren Williams was a guy there, Rashad White later on, he didn't have a great rookie year, but he came in with a pretty good second year in terms of point scoring and stuff like that. And then you get the other thing at running back I think is valuable in rookie drafts is the measure of success at running back is a lot different than it is at wide receiver, right? If you get a 1 or 2 game opportunity to start a running back, like that can be very valuable. But if you get a 2-week span where a wide receiver gets like, I don't know, somewhere between like 7 or 8 targets a game, right? You might not know that's coming. Right. And so that ends up being, we tend to miss on those at receiver, but we tend to capitalize on them at running back is really what the research that I found. So kind of being in that business of the running back position, like you knew when to start Jerome Ford, right? Yeah. You knew when to do that. You knew when to start. Obviously Kyren Williams was an obvious example. Like, but you knew when to start, like Chuba Hubbard, for example. Like down the stretch, if you needed a running back, like you knew when to start Chuba Hubbard because he had taken over that job, and his workload changes. So I think a lot about those and the way you can use running backs deeper in the draft is more functional than the way you can use wide receivers.
And it makes perfect sense, right? I mean, it's just like it is an opportunity game. And if you, like you said, you keep these injury away type guy running backs. That's a phrase I learned from you many years ago. An injury away type running back. Like anytime you have those on your roster, you never know when they're gonna. I mean, I guess you do know when you can start them, but you never know when they're gonna hit. And that's why you keep them on your roster. That's why you draft them. That's why you keep them on your dynasty squads for sure. Okay, let's get it into around the NFL stuff that's floating around. The Boston Herald, and I'm going to butcher his name. I always do. I think it's Doug Keat. He covers the New England Patriots for the Boston Herald. He said the Patriots are meeting with Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy, and Bo Nix out of Oregon. No surprise there. I think that's kind of the de facto top 5 quarterbacks in the draft this year. Now, the Patriots are drafting number 3. You have 2 quarterback-hungry teams, we think, in front of them. They could trade down. They could take a quarterback. I would imagine that they would take a quarterback here. Jordan, at this point in your rookie scouting, which I know is not as deep as it's going to be, come 2 months from now, do you have a good feeling about any of these top 5 guys in Williams, Daniels, May, McCarthy, and Nix?
I think it's fascinating in terms of like the market is so certain. Like the betting market specifically, and that's carried over to Dynasty, but the betting market specifically has been so certain that Caleb Williams is going to go number 1 overall. I 2 months out of the draft, you can't convince me that anything's like a 95% bet, which is basically what the market's saying. You can't convince me of that. And the reason you can't convince me of it is because there's not that many years where there's like a competitive opportunity at 1. It usually doesn't. It's not that common, right? It's more common than not. You have a locked in guy. And the way you can kind of tell is like you get a class where there's like multiple top 5 guys, right? That might be a case where you get like multiple top 5 guys. And that would be what I would consider like a competitive, top of the draft. That is that this year, as we can see with Jaden Daniels and Drake May. So I find it fascinating that he's so locked in, right?
Mm-hmm.
That he's so locked in there. And so I do think we saw it with Baker Mayfield. He hit 30-1 to go number 1 overall. And it was like closer to the draft than right now. And he was still like that. I mean, that's it. Right. And again, like I think that those things are mispriced. I just think the tails of them are mispriced. So I would be like, and there's things about Caleb Williams that I think, like he has an extremely long time to throw, like the longest time to throw of any first round quarterback since it's been tracked. And substantially longer than Justin Fields. And I think like one of the things I've been thinking about is like Shane Waldron, who is the offensive coordinator for Chicago. They moved on from Russell Wilson because he played too much out of structure. And and by the way, he came from a Shanahan McVay coaching tree, right? And McVay famously wanted Mac Jones over Justin Fields, right? So the idea that stylistically a coach would say, hey, I'm not in on kind of what Caleb Williams does. I think the market's too certain. Right. So again, the most likely outcome is he goes 1, but I don't think it's a lock like a lot of people do. And so it's fascinating. Right. I think that's interesting. Like the other one is like Marvin Harrison Jr. Like not going to the combine is a fascinating decision. Right. Yeah. And if he's not going to provide medicals, that's even more fascinating. Right. I was just watching, yesterday and the GMs, I was watching all the GM interviews. Elliot Wolf said the most important thing that they learn at the combine is the medicals. Right. If Marvin Harrison, and that's a team in a window that could take Marvin Harrison. And if Marvin Harrison's not going to go there, like and participate in the medicals, which is kind of my understanding, maybe I'm wrong. If he's not going to participate in that, like that's a fascinating wrench into this whole thing.
What do you make of that? If he's not going to release that information to teams, is this a guy? Because we'll have, and we don't have it yet, but at the FFPC, I mean, we'll have dynasty startups prior to the NFL draft. We have the Never Too Early Best Balls in the Fantasy Pros Championship going on right now. We've seen Marvin Harrison, if I remember the ADP correctly. I mean, this dude is like a 2nd round pick, Jordan, or like an early 3rd round pick. This is redraft. And you think of where he's going to be going in dynasty rookie drafts. If he does not supply have we seen anything at Ohio State that would give us pause and say, okay, wait a minute, he's not releasing any of this information to the NFL and to teams. Do we have to take a step back and say, okay, maybe we feel more comfortable with Malik Neighbors than we do Marvin Harrison Jr.? Are we at that point yet, or is that too early?
I don't know, but that's like, I'm open to the potential that we're there. And that's why I think like when I kind of think about, this time of year, less so like the things that really interest me are kind of like the betting markets at this time of year. Because I'm like, oh, like if wide receiver X goes in round 5, I'm not going to be interested. But if he goes in round 1, like I'm going to be interested. Like the draft's going to tell me that. But so like this time of year, I'm really kind of interested in that. And that kind of forces me to think strategically for dynasty. It just keeps my dynasty brain sharp for practice and all that sort of stuff. And so like, I just keep thinking about that of like, how could that change? And I don't know if there's a good example of this happening. Like he didn't have any major injuries at Ohio State. He did have some ankle stuff that was like kind of unexplained, but that's a normal college thing. I don't know, but every year there's a guy that has like a heart issue or is like diagnosed with cancer out of the comp. Like it's not like, and I'm not even saying that tongue in cheek. Like last year, Sean Tucker probably fell from being a top 100 pick to going undrafted because he had a heart issue. Yep. So like, that's not a tongue in cheek thing. Like that happens once a year. I don't have no reason to suspect it's him, but like there's uncertainty there. And so I find it really interesting. Like, he's basically, he's locked in at being like a 60 to 65% bet to go to Arizona. Like, I don't know. Like, I think that there's probably some value in exploring some other teams in that top 10 other than just that. That seems very certain to me. Very certain. And again, he leaves himself open to getting picked off by Neighbors.
And for February too. I mean, this isn't like late April.
Right.
This is February
Right.
that we're talking about. I think you're right.
Right.
I want to bring it back to veterans here for a little bit. And I know it's weird to talk about Travis Etienne being a veteran, but technically that is what he's at right now. Now, Matthew Berry from NBC Sports was talking with Doug Peterson at the NFL Combine, and Peterson, he didn't necessarily give a ringing endorsement on Travis Etienne being a big-time workhorse again for a second consecutive year. You look back at 2023, he had 325 touches. That was third most among all NFL running backs. And in fact, McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, and Rachaad White were the only running backs that had more rushes than anybody else this past year. Etienne, fourth most pass routes among running backs in 2023. Jordan, is there any actionable dynasty advice based on what Doug Peterson is saying about how he wants, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen, but how he wants to use Travis Etienne this coming year? Things to consider. Yeah, it's fewer touches, but it also might keep him fresher throughout the course of the 2024 season.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I don't think they got what they wanted out of their backfield last year, right? Like when you look at, they didn't get much from Tank Bigsby, right? They spent a day 2 pick on him and basically got a 0 from him. I'm sure that wasn't their intent, right? And I'm sure whatever, I don't know if they missed on the pick or what they know that we don't, but that didn't seem like the plan. But like, I think, going into 2024, you say, okay, like maybe he kind of takes a step back in terms of some of the volume stuff. I don't know. I thought this past year he showed, coming into last year, the concern was he can't score touchdowns. Like he scored double-digit touchdowns last year, so that was fine. And he shows that he can do this, right? So again, I don't expect I'm not going into any year thinking that a running back's going to handle 73% of their team's snaps over the course of a regular season. That's just like it happens, but you should never predict it. So I would predict something, I don't know, something in like line with like Breece Hall and like Jacobs, and like those guys are in like the high 50s to like the low 60s. Like I think that's a pretty reasonable thing, and that that puts him somewhat in that category. Maybe he gets a little bit more efficient.
And if that's the case, then there is not a wild swing coming on Etienne as far as his value goes in 2024. Based on
he didn't get that much more expensive. You know what I mean? It's not like, I mean, he finished as like running back. I guess it's running back 3 in overall points, and then he finished as like a top 7 guy. I don't think anyone's coming out of this being like, I could be wrong, but I don't think anyone's coming out of that like trumpeting Travis Etienne. Like I think it's a really good performance. Like I think that's right in line with what he's capable of doing. But I don't think anyone's like doing a jig, on podcasts or anything, like moving them off boards. I just, it's tough if you don't finish as like a top 2 or 3 guy to really kind of get into that. And, he's probably the next generation of a guy like Josh Jacobs, right? He's a couple of years like younger in the career arc, but a first round guy who kind of hangs around for a while, who people aren't super enthused about, but over, that beats ADP consistently. Like that's kind of the arc that he's on at this point.
I don't know what kind of arc Jameson Williams is on in Detroit. Dan Campbell said this a couple of days ago. According to Pride of Detroit, he's going to, quote, Williams will, quote, push to be a full-time starter this coming year. Now, as a reminder, not that we need one, and Jameson Williams dynasty owners probably really don't want one, but he was suspended for the first month of the 2024 season. This was suspended for the first month of the 2023 season, and this was coming off the previous year where he tore his ACL late in his collegiate season and missed a chunk of time as well. So over his last 6 games, he saw 25 targets. His route running went up as we got deeper into the season. Jared Goff, and I get why he did it. I mean, he's got Sam Laporta over the middle. He has Amon-Ra St. Brown over the middle. He's got a lot of really good options in the intermediate routes. He didn't have to go downfield. But I don't know how much that is changing in 2024. He's still going to have Laporta. He's still going to have Amon-Ra St. Brown. Jameson Williams is 22 years old, a guy that has a lot of talent, but talent doesn't always equate into dynasty stardom and dynasty value. I don't really know what to make of this guy because I know a lot of people drafted him fairly high in their rookie drafts knowing that he was coming off this torn ACL. And I think they have to be underwhelmed by what they've seen so far. Buying opportunity, selling opportunity. I don't know what your shares look like, Jordan, for Jameson Williams right now, but how would you be handling him going forward in your dynasty drafts or dynasty leagues, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, he's in the mid 40s. I find him and Jahan Dotson, they're right next to each other at Fantasy Calc, for example. And I find them fascinating because I think you've seen a lot more out of Jahan Dotson that suggests he's not good. Mm-hmm. Where what you've seen out of Jameson Williams is a whole lot of question marks, right? Like, I'm not convinced that he's not good. I'm just really concerned that he's not playing, right? So I think it's a little bit different. And so, I mean, by the way, one of my life goals is to have coffee with Dan Campbell. I think that would be an amazing experience.
Oh, yeah.
And he's an extremely positive guy. But listen, if you're going to be pushing to be a full-time starter, like, you should have been doing that as a rookie, not as a third-year guy. So, like, that's kind of like a truism to me, or something, like, no kidding, right? Like, I don't fault Dan Campbell for saying it, but, like, he should be a starter, right? Like, absolutely. Like, Josh Reynolds shouldn't be out there running 20% more routes than you. Like, that shouldn't happen.
Right.
And so, we'll see. Like, I think at his price, it's okay, like, into the later 40s. Again, like, him and Dotson, like, I'd much rather have Jameson Williams.
And you probably, I mean, if you want to take a chance on Williams, he's tough to get because whoever has him right now is probably going to hold on because of the price they paid for him. So it's like, I guess, hold him if you got him. If you don't have him, you're probably not, he's probably still not at a price for the people who own him to be the point where, like, if you don't have him, you can go out and get him. At least that's how I'm treating it, Jordan.
Yeah. I explore the market and he's like, it's a cliff, right? If you don't do it this year, it's going to free fall, right? So I think that's the thing you got to realize. Like, if you come out of round 3 as basically a first round rookie wide receiver, and you come out of it without like a top 25 seasonal finish, you're free falling in value and production expectation in the future.
Let's go out to the YouTube chat right now. Bill Hollywood, our good buddy, has a Marvin Mims question. And Jordan, is pretty simple. He just wants to know, in 2024, what do we expect from Mims? I remember in redraft last year, there was it was a race to get Mims. It seemed like he would be in the 14th round, then somebody take him in the 13th, 12th, 11th. It kept going up and up and up because we knew how talented he was, and we knew the other guys in that offense, Sutton and Judy, although Sutton had a pretty good season last year, at least as far as touchdowns go. We knew that they had an opportunity to show out, and they hadn't. But Mims was the shiny new toy. He was the mystery box pick. There's a lot of people that were very excited about him. There's a lot of people that thought he was not utilized enough in that Denver offense last year. Now, if that falls on Peyton or Wilson or who knows, then we could talk about that as well. But Mims, as a sophomore now, still in the same team, still in the same offense, what kind of numbers is he going to do this year? And what do you do with him in Dynasty, whether you own him or not?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned, right? Because you see, Peyton said anytime we threw him the ball, like he performed well, and that of course begs the question of why he wasn't playing more. If that's what you believe about a guy, so is that some sort of signal that he's limited? Is it what is that a statement about? I don't know, but his target route per route run stats are pretty bad. And that's the thing I kind of look at and I'm like, eesh, like, is that a place where you want to get in on and pay a premium for a guy that was only targeted on 13% of his routes? Like, you need that number to basically be at 20 or above to be really fantasy viable. I have a stat as well called targets per open route run, which basically, strips out the contested targets you get and says, okay, if you ran a route that wasn't a contested target, how often are you targeted? He's at 10.5%. Like, that's grim. That's like really not good. So while he was, while he did flash a little bit, he's got a big ADOT. Like, that whole profile about, like, targets are earned and so are snaps. And he very much didn't do those things. That gives me some concern. I wouldn't be paying a premium for him right now.
Yeah, and I think that you probably don't have to. I mean, like, I know people invested in him in rookie drafts. I think he was like an end of the first round, early second round pick. but I don't think people hold on to him. Like they're willing to kill that baby. If you drafted him last year, at least that's the feeling I'm getting. He's not like one of these guys where you invest at the top 3 or 4 pick, and then as a result, you're going to give a leash of, definitely more than one season. Mims is a type of guy, especially with that offense in Denver kind of in flux right now. I think people are more than willing to deal him away, and you might be able to get a good deal on him. I want to bring up, and I don't know what the consecutive hit streak is on this show, but I feel like I bring up Kyle Pitts literally every single show, maybe every single show that I've ever done on the Better Sports Network here with the HSFF show. General manager for the Falcons, Terry Fontenot, said Kyle Pitts is going to be healthy entering the offseason. He had a knee injury throughout the 2023 season, which obviously if you had him on your teams, you drafted him, you traded for him, you weren't happy with the results. Zach Robinson is the new offensive coordinator there. Zach Robinson says Kyle Pitts has, quote, formational versatility, which is going to be the team name for a lot of my fantasy football teams this year. And he's going to be a key part of the Atlanta passing game in 2024. Last year, he ran 59% of his routes from the slot, which was 4th highest among tight ends. In fact, George Kittle was the only tight end that had a higher yards per catch from the slot. He's polarizing literally every year he's been in the league so far. Jordan, if you have Kyle Pitts, what are you doing? If you don't have him, what are you doing? What do we need to be doing as dynasty owners to properly handle Kyle Pitts in our dynasty leagues right now?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I would trade him for Mark Andrews, right, in a flash. So that would be the first thing that I would do, right? If I had Pitts, I would say I'd go to the Andrews person and see if they want to swap, right? I would do that, before you could say go. I would hit accept on that. So that'd be kind of my first salvo, I think, in this. I mean, no kidding, right? Like, of course he has positional. This is stuff that we know, right? Like, he has positional flexibility, right? You lined him out and he played the X receiver like an extensive amount of time. Like, we know that Kyle Pitts has positional flexibility. The question is why isn't he getting targets out of that, right? Why? It's interesting to know that he was hurt the whole year. Right. I do kind of look at that, and that makes me, and there was some suggestion of that, right? With the injury that he had, there were some medical people that had said, like, he's not going to be healthy. Like, he's going to be limited. And that showed. I come back to it and I say, I think Kyle Pitts is a really good cautionary tale for what people shouldn't do with Brock Bowers. Right. I think that's the first thing. But the second thing I would say is, like, when you show me something elite, which like 2 yards per route run as a tight end, as a rookie, it would qualify. And he's in that ballpark. When you do something like that, like I can't let you go, is kind of how I see it. That didn't mean to me, like, when he did it, that he was like the best tight end ever. But now that he's fallen, I'm interested. Right. That's kind of the way that I think about that. So again, I would take Mark Andrews, who's like, they're right next to each other in some valuation things. Like, I would take Mark Andrews like in a flash over him. But after that, it's pretty interesting, right? Because you get into some different profiles of different guys and you say, okay, like, if the answer is he wasn't healthy and he had Desmond Ridder throwing him the ball, like, I don't know, like both of those things could really improve this year. And I think his quarterback is a key question too. Like, I really hope it's not Justin Fields. I hope it's someone, a good, competent passer. But we'll see how that goes as well.
What excuse me, what does your gut tell you about Atlanta this year as far as their quarterback goes? I mean, do you think it's going to be Fields? Do you think it's going to be a rookie? Do you think they're going to trade for somebody? I've heard Kirk Cousins mentioned as well. What do you think Atlanta's going to do? And I guess because whatever you think Atlanta's going to do is sort of dictating what you're doing with Pitts, what you're doing with London, Bijan Robinson, so on and so forth.
Yeah, they got to do something. So I don't know what it is.
It can't be Ridder. It cannot be Ridder.
No, okay. It can't be Ridder. I do wonder, like, if I'm in the NFC and I'm a team like Atlanta and it's like, okay, hey, listen, you got to go out and spend 3 first-round picks to move up to take your quarterback 3 on your board.
Mm-hmm.
Or you've got Russell Wilson and he's willing to play on the minimum just so he can give the bird to Denver every week about the salary that they're going to pay, right? Which I would just love to see. Like, yes, I will take the minimum, and you can just, every week you can write me whatever amount of money that check would be. It's probably north of like $2 million that Denver would have to write. That's interesting in the NFC, right? Like in the AFC, that's not quite as interesting. In the NFC, that's interesting because like you're not playing Mahomes and Allen and Lamar Jackson and like, who's the third best quarterback in the NFC? It's not a 2-time defending. It's not a 2-time MVP. I can tell you that, right? No matter how you order those guys, it's not someone on the quality of Lamar Jackson, right? And so I think of that like that's an interesting thing. Like I can see why they'd be interested in Cousins, right? I don't think there's a clear answer to them. That's the part, right. Like they're too far down the board, right? If they were sitting at 2, I would just say take your guy. But I don't know, I think they have options open to them. If it was me, I wouldn't do Justin Fields unless it was a pretty cheap pick. Would be kind of my advice on that. But I don't know. They haven't called yet. So I'll hold that just in case they do.
Just in case they do. We'll find out. We'll find out from the Falcons what Jordan McNamara is saying that they should do a quarterback. That's going to be great. We have much more great content coming up for you here. I want to talk about Calvin Ridley with you. I want to get into this huge discourse you got in with Jamar Chase versus Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think that was fascinating stuff. Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, I think, is an important person to bring up as well. So a veteran wide receiver heavy segment coming up. He's Jordan McNamara, analytics of dynasty.com, the Dynasty Think Tank Podcast, at McNamara Dynasty on the X. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Don't go anywhere. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on exclusively on the Better Sports Network right after this.
The thing with Dynasty is that it's so hard to get a good league going. Like, it's very difficult to get all these friends that are going to be paying attention, or they're going to stick with it, and they're not going to say, oh, I don't want to play anymore. My team stinks. Find somebody else next year. And then you're collecting dues, and then you're getting in arguments, and you're arguing with people on Twitter about dues. Like, we've seen too much of that going on. So it's very difficult. And what happens is you find like 5 or 6 good people that want to play, and then you don't have enough people, and you fill the league with a bunch of weirdos. So what I like doing, honestly, at this stage is if I'm going to play Dynasty, I want to play on a nice, clean, serious, professional site, and I go to FFPC to play, right? FFPC has never had a league fold. Eric Balkman over there told me that. He's like, if somebody has to leave a league, we just fill it. So your option is you can go and do a startup, and like Jack said in the chat, you start it, and then you go and you figure out who you're going to take from the top down. And if you want to do like a long rebuild, or a long-term team, or if you want to try and win right away and get a bunch of vets, you can do that. Or you can adopt an orphan team, and with that you go out and somebody quit, and that's so much fun, because then you take their team and you have all these guys that you like, but then you have all of these guys that they had that you don't like, and that's actually way more fun, because then you can trade all those guys, and it's so much fun to trade. Like when I go to orphan teams, I used to say, oh, I'm not going to take this team because all the players, I don't like them. I only want players I do like. But I've realized that it's actually more fun to take the teams that have a couple guys you really like and a couple guys that everyone else likes that you don't like, and then trade them. Like go and grab an orphan team like Gabe Davis and trade him to some Gabe Davis guy. So go do that now. Use you can use the QR code here, or a link in the description, or go to myffpc.com. Just make sure you use promo code COOP when you get set up. They'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more. And that's another thing. When you make a league with your friends, Coop isn't giving you $25, right? You have to pay the full dues. This time you get a little discount. So yeah, go over there. And also for you maniacs out there, they do have high stakes leagues. So these leagues, if you want, you can go big time. I know some of the redraft leagues, we announced on this channel a redraft league that 10K buy-in. I'm not sure the Dynasty ones go that high, but they go into the thousands. So if you want to take this real seriously and get crazy with it, do it. That's the place to do it. myffpc.com, promo code COOP, baby. Go get set up.
21 minutes until the top of the hour here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman, at Eric Balkman on the X, from the FFPC, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, the HSFF Hour. He's Jordan McNamara. Check him out at analyticsofdynasty.com, at McNamara Dynasty on the X, as well as the Dynasty Think Tank podcast that he does with Chad Parsons. We just saw the rookie spinner there, Jordan, and I know that you purposefully do not get super invested in rookies this early in the season. When do you store? I mean, is it like just a case of like when your rookie drafts are starting, then you'll delve deep into rookies? Do you wait until like early April, mid-April? When is the proper time? Because I know there's plenty of people that don't like they go out of their way to not get rookie fever at this point of the season, and I think it can make them better fantasy football players. How do you sort of handle the rookie class every year?
The less rookie content that I do, and the less rookie content I consume, the better my ROI has been. Like that is consistent. Like it's a really odd looking graph because you wouldn't expect that to be true. But I think the thing about that is I'm focused on elite difference making players as opposed to being focused on depth options on my dynasty team. And that's what I think a lot of the rookie study ends up producing is, a lot about your bench guys, where I'm trying to use this time of year to leverage what I know and sort of what I studied. And hopefully some of the receivers we'll be talking about, and elite quarterbacks and those sorts of things and your premium formats, right? To be kind of focused on being in that business, right? Because the way I view it is almost counter-cyclical, right? That's research and discussion and debate that'll be had in July through August in the redraft market. But if we're ahead of that in, February and March and kind of thinking ahead about what's going to happen in terms of like the analysis that's going to be done, if we're doing it now and sort of jumping ahead of people and then, okay, here's kind of where the market's going to move. Like, here's what people are going to kind of be saying about these players and what they did last year in a few months. Like if you do it the opposite of what Dynasty does and go instantly from the season to rookies, and you go from the season and just stay on the season and do all that analysis now, I think you're in a very different position. I think one of strength.
I think that, I shouldn't say I think this. I wonder if this is going to be the new thing where we have become so saturated with rookie content, with rookie analysis, with rookie fever, basically from mid-January on until the end of April or, early May or whatever it is. I wonder if the new thing is going to be like, hey, let's focus less on the rookie class, more on what we can be doing with the veterans on our dynasty squads. And that's really the secret to unlocking fantasy success, to unlocking the best possible results that we can get from our dynasty squads. We're not there yet, and we may never.
It'll never take over.
You don't think it will be because there's just because there's nothing going on at this point in the season. What else do we have to focus on? Maybe that's the crux of it.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And it's interesting, like it's entertaining, right? But to me, it's not a place where it's super profitable.
It's empty calories, Jordan. It's empty calories.
Yeah,
right?
that's a great reference. The one thing that like I kind of think about is like when you look at like just take first round wide receivers, for example, Dynasty ADP, which is all of that work basically synthesized, right? All that analysis that you basically talked about. It's a market, right? It's a free market, right? I kind of believe in efficient markets, right? That markets tend towards efficiency over time. You would think with all of that work and all of the analysis that we have and all of it that's improved and gotten better and all of that it would do better at predicting performance, and you would be wrong, right? Like that has not been the case. And I think that that's not the case for a number of reasons, right? There's on one hand, like you don't control the outcome, right? And you don't know, like there's so much that you don't know about players that determines their performance that we're never in a position to know, right? That's the first thing. And the second thing is like the sample size is really small, but like you look consistently like that Justin Jefferson was never debated to be the number one wide receiver in his class. That was never a conversation, right? He was consistently 4. He was much closer to 5 than 2. Okay. Yeah. He was much closer to 5. Like that was not a tier. Right? He was in a tier with Ayuk more than he was with the top 3 guys. And, he's by far the best. Like, you look consistently at that, at those things, and that happens all the time. And I just keep coming back to, like, if we're using all of this analysis and all of this time to get these results, why do we continue doing it? Let's zag. And that's my whole approach. So I think the less time that I've spent doing rookies, like the better my teams have been, right? Because I just kind of let that market, sort itself out. And then, if everyone is so confident on wide receiver 1 or 2 of this draft, and there's 5 guys in the first round, I'll take 4 or 5, like, especially if it's at a like, go ahead, you can pay to make the hard decisions. That's, I think, a great thing in Dynasty. Like, let other people pay to make the hard decisions. I love doing that.
Going back to that 2020 draft with Justin Jefferson, to drive your point home, the top 2 receivers in that draft were both out of Alabama. Ruggs at 12, Judy at 15. You had Jalen Reagor go at 21. Other receivers that were taken after Ruggs and Judy, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Ayuk, who you mentioned, T. Higgins, and Michael Pittman. Just crazy town banana pants when you go back and think about what we were talking about in March that year or February of that year. It's trippy. It's absolutely trippy. Okay, so let's do this. Let's not focus on the rookies, at least right now. We might delve into a rookie conversation here over the next hour and 14 minutes. I do want to talk with you about Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley was a guy. Now, I'm going to speak about him in redraft, but I want you to focus about his dynasty prospects going forward. I was not excited for this guy last year, Jordan. I've said it a zillion times on the show. Bill Hollywood, who watches a lot of these shows, thank you for the kind words, Bill, is probably sick of hearing this. New offense, new OC, new head coach, new quarterback, new everything. And he was out of football for the better part of 2 years. I was like, there's no way that this guy is going to have a successful 2023. And then I looked like a horse's patoot after week 1 because Ridley crushed it. Right, yeah. And so then I was like, well, I guess I was wrong about him. But as the season went on, I mean, he had his highs, he had his lows. And I think if it wasn't for that Christian Kirk injury, he may have not have been as successful as he was. Although on the flip side of it, I don't think a lot of people saw that Evan Engram season coming too, which took away some targets from Calvin Ridley. The point is this. John Shipley from Sports Illustrated reports that the Jaguars want Calvin Ridley back for 2024. Now, 900 yards last season, 7 touchdowns, 70 catches. He's an unrestricted free agent. He's going to be 30 years old this year. But the Jaguars want him back. And if the Jaguars want him back, he's going to be contending with catches again with Kirk, Engram, and Travis Etienne, quite frankly, as well. How do you handle Ridley? I mean, I'm looking at him like I don't have him on any of my dynasty teams, Jordan, and I'm wondering, like, maybe I should go out and try to get him at this point. How do you feel about Ridley for dynasty?
I think he's older than we appreciate. Right. And it's been a while since he's been a true difference maker. Like, outside of that week 1 last year, again, all the points count. But outside that week 1 from week 2 on, wide receiver 25. So again, that's fine. But like, I wouldn't get, like, my heart doesn't race because of it. Right. Like, that's the thing I think with him. Like, people got so enamored with what he could be. It's been a lot of what he could be for a while with Calvin Ridley, right? So I'm careful about that. I don't think he's over expensive. I do think it'd be interesting for a team like, New England to be in on a guy like him, right? He could, like, there's definitely spots out there that you could see him go into and have a really open opportunity. I think for Jacksonville, it's fascinating, right? Because if you let him walk, right, the compensation you owe is a 3rd-round pick to Atlanta, and you probably get a 3rd-round pick and a comp pick, right? So that's probably a net neutral pick. It's a neutral. It's probably pretty close to a neutral decision to let him walk. If you keep him, you give a 2nd, and you don't get back a 3rd, right? So it begs the question, like, okay, if that's going to be the case, if basically the cost to keep Calvin Ridley is a 2nd-round rookie pick or a 2nd-round NFL draft pick, am I better off trading a 1st for Brandon Ayuk? right? Like that's the next kind of thing that I came to. And like, I think I'd rather do that than sort of be in the business of Calvin Ridley personally.
I'm with you on this because it's difficult for me to throw out everything I thought about Ridley. And yeah, it is, if he comes back to Jacksonville, it is year 2, right? And we saw what he did in year 1. So I do have a little bit more faith in him this year, but I would stand on you as far as if those are if that's the alternative I'm being faced with, I'm going to go that way instead of having Ridley on my roster. Okay. Here's the main event. We've had the mid cards. What a conversation you got in with a bunch of subscribers, followers on the X about Ja'Marr Chase versus Amon-Ra St. Brown. So this will lead off our Where Do You Stand On segment here. Where do you stand on Ja'Marr Chase versus Amon-Ra St. Brown? Can you tell us a little bit about, because I think like anything on X, stuff gets twisted. People think you're saying one thing when you're actually not saying that. But for the record, now you have this long form opportunity to talk about this. In Dynasty, Ja'Marr Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Let's hash it out here, Jordan.
Yeah, so it of course got blown out of proportion of like, well, what do you mean? Let's just start from the perspective of this, okay? On a per route basis, okay, that means for if you equalize out the routes that they have run in their career, Amon-Ra St. Brown has scored more points per route than Ja'Marr Chase. Okay, so the idea that somehow Ja'Marr Chase is like flatly superior to him is, I struggle with that.
Yeah.
Right? In his career, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 2.27 yards per route run, 2.1 for Ja'Marr Chase. Okay. If you're into things like targets per route run in his career, Amon-Ra St. Brown has been targeted on 26% of his routes, 23% for Ja'Marr Chase. PFF grades, if that's your thing, 99th percentile for Amon-Ra St. Brown, 96th percentile for Ja'Marr Chase. They're both really good. Okay. But the idea that Ja'Marr Chase is just flat superior, I have a hard time with. Of the two, they're 3 years in the league. Amon-Ra St. Brown has the best one. And I think if you kind of cap it at basically like halfway through Amon-Ra St. Brown's rookie season, they've been basically equal in stats. So, and that was, it was a slow start for Amon-Ra St. Brown before he went, elite. He was Puka before Puka was a thing, right? So I think like they belong in the same tier, right? And that's actually, I got in this debate and then I sort of started working it out on Twitter, and I was like, yeah, I actually do believe this, because I was trying to figure out if the top 4 wide receivers, and I still don't have an exact answer to this, but I think I'm closer now than I was. I believe that Justin Jefferson's the top wide receiver. I then believe that there's 3 receivers after him. And what I'm trying to figure out is it a tier of 3 or is it a tier of 1 and then 3 more? Right. And I think the debate was, does Amon-Ra St. Brown belong in the same tier? This is what my debate was. I didn't say this publicly, but the thing that I was like thinking about was, does Amon-Ra St. Brown belong in the same tier as CeeDee Lamb and Ja'Marr Chase? And the answer to that question to me is yes. That is the conclusion that I've come to. Now, you can go back and say, listen, Chase has scored more points. Chase has done this, right? Yes, right. But that's a lot of that is not under Amon-Ra St. Brown's control. Mm-hmm. Listen, Cincinnati throws the ball a ton, and people are like, well, which one would you project next year to score more points? I was like, frankly, Chase, because Amon-Ra St. Brown's not going to run as many routes as Chase, right? Like it's just a math problem. Like I'm not, and so that would be the way I would lean. I just think Cincinnati's going to throw the ball more than Detroit, right? But I think as players, they're very different players, right? But again, if it came down to like, hey, you have to, it's your season's on the line, you need to complete a pass. The number of people that I would choose over Amon-Ra St. Brown is like alarmingly low. Mm-hmm. Like it's a lot. Like it's not bigger than like 3. And again, you saw it in the game. Like a game clinching ball. Like they put him outside and they were like a win and we win. And like he did. And it was obvious if they threw it where they were going to go. right? Like, and I mean, that's what he does. So I have a huge amount of respect for his ability to get open. Like, all his metrics are awesome. Again, Jamar Chase is great. But I think that like Amon-Ra St. Brown belongs in that conversation. And that's really the point.
Our buddy BH chiming in, he'd take Tyreek Hill, he'd take Justin Jefferson over St. Brown right now. Tyreek Hill, a little long in the tooth. I don't know if I would. But here's the question, Jordan, when it comes down to this. If we believe that Amon-Ra St. Brown is in that tier, right? And if anybody who just listened to your discourse on this, if they agree with you that that's the case, shouldn't we or they or everybody who agrees, shouldn't we be offering trades to try to get St. Brown plus in exchange for Chase, in exchange for, right? You know what I mean? Because if he's on that tier and there's not a huge drop off, I think based on what I saw on X, like there's a lot of people that value Chase significantly higher than Amon-Ra St. Brown. And like to the point where some of these people are like, it's not even close. We just talked about the hard concrete stats on this. Like it is very close. And at this point, this could be a buying opportunity to net you a similar player plus something, basically free at this point, right? Isn't that the actionable advice that we should be giving based on Amon-Ra St. Brown here?
Yeah. I think that's a great, right. And you arbitrage those opportunities, right? It's a great thing. The thing about Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think I'm not a big day 3 wide receiver fan, but once they kind of become something, like I get in on them because they're rare stories. So like you'd be hard pressed to find a guy, and for no particular reason other than like I think he's awesome. You'll be hard pressed to find someone that's a bigger Amon-Ra St. Brown fan, like out of the Detroit metro area or his family than I am. Like I love the guy. I think he's awesome. But like there's some things about him that I thought were said that were unfair. And one of them is like he does the easy stuff. Listen, being targeted on, I have a metric. Again, I mentioned this earlier, what I call targets per open route run. So this is basically the percentage of your routes that you're, when you're not throwing a contested target, the percentages of those routes that you're targeted on. Okay. 100th percentile guy, right? That ain't easy, right? Yeah. That ain't easy, right? And you're talking about like, and Chase for his part is a 90th percentile guy. Like that's good. But what, being targeted on 26% of his routes, like that has never been people comped him to Chris Godwin about doing the easy stuff. Chris Godwin never got above like 22 or 23%. Right? And Amon-Ra St. Brown's in a 26% of his routes being targeted. Like that's elite stuff, right? And again, the ADOT's a little bit lower. His ADOT was higher than Chase, by the way, this year. So that's a thing that happened. So I look at him and I'm like, I think he belongs in the elite tier, right? I think the tier is Jefferson at 1. And then after that, it's a tier of like 3 guys, right? In Dynasty for me. And he belongs in it. And again, that's above guys that I think are really good as well. Like that's above guys like AJ Brown, right? Like that's how high I think of Amon-Ra St. Brown. I just think he belongs in that conversation.
I want to hop around a little bit here in this segment for where do you stand on. I want to ask you where you stand on Puka Nacua, because I know what you said about third day wide receivers in regards to Amon-Ra St. Brown. You said you love Amon-Ra St. Brown. But when it comes to Puka Nacua, he's going to be a polarizing player this year. He's like a first-round pick in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball tournaments. And I think there are a lot of people that have seen enough from him to know, like, look, he's the new guy. Cooper Kupp is getting older. He's having these soft tissue injuries. I'm on board with Nacua. There's other people that still, after what they saw last year, flash in the pan. He's not going to be able to do it again. Sophomore slump, all the lazy analysis that you want to get to. For dynasty purposes, what are you doing with Nacua? Is he a guy that you're selling high on? Is he a guy you're buying more shares on? Is he a guy you're standing pat on? Because he is another day 3 receiver, Jordan.
Yeah. So I think the dynasty is different than the player take. So I would just say generally in dynasty, like unless you have like if you're playing super flex, if you're playing tight end premium, unless you have those positions really locked away, you shouldn't be upgrading at receiver. Like that's the initial sort of my thought on that as a strategic point. But so that's the first thing I would say on that. But to Puka Nacua specifically, we just talked about Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? I just lauded about him for several minutes about his metrics. He's at 2.27 yards per route run in his career. Puka Nacua is at 2.59. Like, that's absurd, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just an absurd number. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I just talked about how he's always open and there's no one I'd trust more. Like, there's very few people I'd trust more. When he started on 26% of his routes, Puka Nacua at 26.7, right? So, like, of all those things I just said, like, Puka Nacua is even better, which is like incredible. So I'm like, you can't fake elite. Like, you can't fake elite, right? Once you are elite,
that's a good fantasy football team name going forward too. You can't fake elite, especially for Dynasty. Keep going. I'm sorry.
It's not that you just, like, when you do that, like, you become elite. And again, it becomes like injuries and can you sustain that way? But like, there's no doubt in my mind that he's like an elite. He did absolutely elite things. Now, some of the question might be like, how does that age with, do we get a great Stafford year again? Like, I understand why he's a little bit of a tier down below those guys. But again, like, you could toss him up in that top conversation. Like, I think he belongs. And it's funny because I'll just kind of debate things and be like, well, does this actually belong? Right. And everyone's mad at me because I think that there's value on maybe looking at someone other than Caleb Williams at 1. Mm-hmm. I start thinking about things like, okay, like, what's the conversation? Like, what do you say about Nacua at like 5 in a 2 through 5 tier, right? That's interesting, right? Like, again, you start looking at those numbers and you say, well, why would you exclude him? Right? It's not age, it's not production. Like, what do you, are you worried about the lack of resume? Is that what it is? And again, if you're worried about the lack of resume, should you be worried about a lack of resume when you've seen basically the most efficient, effective rookie wide receiver we've ever seen? Right. Like, how much really should you be worried about resume when that's true? I think it's an interesting thing. And I'm kind of talking myself into another conversation of elevating another wide receiver, which I don't know. It's weird because I usually don't spend my off seasons like preaching wide receivers, but here I am.
Well, let's talk about, here's the thing. I want to talk about 2 more here, but they're both on the same team. And I think we can go very different directions with them. The number 1 receiver drafted in the 2023 NFL draft was Jaxon Smith-Njigba. He's real life teammates with Tyler Lockett, a guy, Dan Williamson, the overhyped sleeper on the X, a guy who is a very successful FFPC player, Dynasty especially. He takes Lockett in a lot of his best balls every year because he's always there and because people underrate him. And I'm kind of with him at that point with best ball. With Dynasty, I think it's a little bit different. Can you tell me a little bit about how you feel about those 2? If you want to get into Metcalf, you can, but I'm certainly not twisting your arm. But with Lockett and Smith-Njigba specifically, Jordan, how do you value those guys going forward before we start the 2024 NFL season?
By the way, I love Dan. He's great. So we'll just shout out Dan before we go any further. He shares my affinity for Tyler Lockett. I'm a big fan. You wouldn't have thought this through the first like half of this podcast, but I'm a big fan of like aging wide receivers that have become depressed by the market. And Tyler Lockett's a great example of that. I mean, Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, like, my affinity for the 2 young guys that I just talked about, like, doesn't spread that wide, right? So guys like, I'm pretty skeptical of guys like Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Like, I'm skeptical that receivers that are going to come in instantly and be like super dominant performers, like we've seen with some of these young guys. Just the odds on that aren't that high. So I'm pretty skeptical of that. Like, I'm very much in on guys like Tyler Lockett. I suggested actually after he was drafted, I said, there's a real chance that Jaxon Smith-Njigba is a wide receiver 3 for his team for 2 years. We're through 1. Yeah. Right. And again, 1.32 yards per route run. That's not good. Like, that's below the success rate line. 18.9% targets per route run. That's not good. Like, that's below average for a first round wide. The thing I kind of come back to with him, and I don't know, like, the ADOT's really low. But the thing that I come back to with him is like, he was targeted on a really, really high percentage of their 3rd and 4th down targets, like a top 10 to 12 number in the league. And for a guy that didn't, that wasn't targeted that much, right? I come back to that and I say, like, all the guys that were up there are really good. And then you have him. So his overall metrics lagged, I think that's a sign of like if I'm pulling on a string that's like, hey, like there's something really there about him. I think that's really the thing that I'm most encouraged about by his rookie season. But I think he's a good cautionary tale of like, you got to be careful about assuming that good college production is going to transfer instantly to the pros. Be very careful on that, right? Be very careful on that. And I think that he's a good example of that.
Okay, so that's good analysis right there on Smith-Njigba. And he's not as polarizing as the next guy I want to talk about, but I'm going to save him. I want to take a break here. When we come back, Jordan's going to tell us about Nico Collins, specifically the Texans' passing game situation, which I think is very compelling here. I also want to get his thoughts on what we do with these rookies that are not participating in the combine, what we should be doing with tight ends in our rookie drafts, and we might get into some rookie analysis with the running backs as well. He's Jordan McNamara. Analytics of Dynasty.com is where you want to go and subscribe, at McNamara Dynasty on the X. Dynasty Think Tank is the podcast, at Dino Think Tank on the X as well. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on for hour number 2 on the Better Sports Network right after this.
Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament is already open right now over at FFPC. Drafts are available daily, 2-hour clock or 6-hour clock, or the sit and go 30-second clock if you really just want to bang out a draft. Those are scheduled in advance, so you can go get set up on that. Take a shot, either $25,000 or $10,000 grand prize. That's in the Never Too Early Best Ball contest. They got some big prizes over there, man. And you can play high stakes games over there too. So you can hit this QR code that's right in front of my face, or go to myffpc.com. Use promo code COOP, COOP. They'll give you $25 off when you deposit $35 or more. So go get set up right now. We're doing, we already do our dynasty, we do our redrafts over there, we do our high stakes stuff, but we do the playoff contest, we do it all. So I'm going to get in the best ball too. It's never, for me, whatever you got, whatever contest you got, I'm going to play, I'm going to win. That's it. So go over to myffpc.com, use promo code COOP, and you can win as well.
You saw the spinner there. MyFFPC.com is where to go for the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. A $125 entry fee can get you eligible for a $25,000 grand prize, $35 entry fee eligible for a $10,000 grand prize in the Superflex Best Ball Tournament over at MyFFPC.com. And that's where to pick up your Dynasty Orphans as well. Some as low as $1 a ton of Dynasty Orphan teams have been lowered to have their entry fees lowered for 2024. MyFFPC.com is where to go on that. Jordan McNamara joining me, Eric Balkman, here for hour number 2 of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network, at Eric Balkman on X, at McNamara Dynasty on X, and of course, check out analyticsofdynasty.com. Listen to the Dynasty Think Tank anywhere you get your podcast, as Jordan co-hosts that show with the incomparable Chad Parsons, another former co-host of this show. Let's talk about, I want to lead off this hour with Nico Collins, which I've been listening and reading a lot of stuff lately, Jordan, about the fact that we don't want to, or that we as Dynasty players should not overrate what Nico Collins did in 2023 based on what he did in prior to that year in his NFL career, as well as what he did at Michigan. Knowing that Houston probably has not done adding to their wide receiver room, despite what we saw from Collins and Tank Dell last year. Maybe they even go really early and draft a first-round receiver or maybe an early second-round receiver. Like, I don't know which way they're going to go, but there is a non-zero chance that they attack the receiver position, in which case Nico Collins, who's being drafted very high in redrafts and being highly sought after in dynasty leagues, maybe the shine wears off on him pretty quick. I don't know if you have Collins on any of your dynasty teams. What's the proper way to be handling him right now?
Yeah, I've heard the skepticism, and I think the skepticism, if I had to guess, I think the skepticism is like a couple of fold. Like, A, people think that they're going to bring somebody in. B, the other thing is like Tank Dell. He's in a weird spot though, right? Where he's a 25-year-old wide receiver, right? I think he'll be 25, that is going cheaper in dynasty than he is in redraft. And anytime you see that, you have to, you very much need to readjust how you think about him in Dynasty, right? When you have a guy that's been productive and all of a sudden best ball is putting him over his Dynasty marketplace, right? Usually the young guys are all overpriced in Dynasty relative to best ball, right? I think best ball is the thing you look at and you're like, okay, you have to, in a situation like that, I trust the best ball ADP more than I trust the Dynasty ADP, right? So I would move higher on Nico. Like that's my initial reaction to that type of situation. The other thing I look at is like let's look at some of the comps for him. Like, you know, the top 5 guys in yards per route run against man coverage, for example, CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins, number 2. Number 3 is a guy by the name of Tyreek Hill. And then it's a huge tier break down to DJ Moore, Brandon Ayuk, and then Justin Jefferson. That rounds out the top 6. Like, you don't fake that, right? Like, again, I come back to, like, he has shown us stuff that is really, really hard to fake. That metric I talked about as well, targets per open route run. The reason I'm so big about that stat is because it correlates really well year over year, and it correlates really well to production, right? Like points per route run and those sorts of things. Like, it's the best predictor of that. And so you strip out a lot of the noise of some of the variance and contested catches and all that stuff, and you just kind of get down to the crux of it. Like, it's a really good predictor of performance. And like, he's in the top 8 of it, right? Like, again, it's really, those are hard things to fake. Like, he's not where I would be concerned about him was if I saw him be a, you know, like a contested catch merchant that was like dependent on a handful of big plays, right? That's where I get concerned about receivers, is like that type of profile. He didn't fit that. That's not what he is. Like, he's a target dominant player. And, you know, the fact that he performed with Tank Dell out, like, you know, it was him, Robert Woods, and Noah Brown, right? Like, you know, those guys are fine, but it's not like you've got, you know, field tilting, you know, difference makers on the other side with Devin Singletary running back, right? And Dalton Schultz. Like, it wasn't exactly like a murderer's row of people lifting coverage for him. Like, you know, Stroud's awesome and Tank Dell's great too, but I think Nico Collins is awesome. And then I come back to like, okay, who would you be scared of if you're him? Like, if you traded for T. Higgins, are you scared of that? Because I'm not. Right? That dude's the exact opposite of Nico Collins. T. Higgins doesn't get open. Nico Collins gets open all the time, right? Like, you know, are you really worried about, you know, some of these other guys? Like, are you worried about Mike Evans? Like, that would be the one that would worry me. I guess Brandon Ayuk would worry me too. But again, like, I think that those things are lower.
And real quick, Jordan, if they draft a rookie, you're even worried less about a rookie.
Oh, I couldn't. Yeah. Okay. Right. They're going to draft a rookie in the 20s. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm not going to be if I was Nico Collins, they drafted a rookie in the 20s, I'd be like, great. Like, it wasn't like, you know, like, it wasn't Mike Evans. It wasn't right. Like, and I think people will look at that and be like, oh, they're scared. Like, no, you should, like, honestly, like, unless you have like elite receiving cores, like, you should always be drafting wide receivers. Like, I wouldn't fault them for that. But at the same time, like, yeah, it's really, we just talked about Jaxon Smith-Njigba, right? The person that comes out, if they were to draft someone in the 20s, they're going to be well lower than Smith-Njigba in terms of like wide receiver rankings. Like, you really think like wide receiver 6'7", something like that's going to come in this year and just take Nico Collins' job? Like, good luck. Yeah. Good luck. Because like we've, you know, I don't know. That's just not, like, he was really good last year. Really, really, really good at things that are really hard to be good at. He was really good at them.
Without getting into the nitty gritty and everything to know about all these rookies, which will on this show we will get into over the course of the next couple months. We don't have to do it tonight. I think you led off the show. You didn't lead off the show, but you said it earlier in the show, earlier in the first hour, that you thought the players not participating in the combine, this was fascinating to you. We specifically talked about Marvin Harrison. Where do you stand on these players not participating in combine? To me, some of them, I get why they're doing it, but as far as dynasty owners, is there anything that sets off bells or red flags or whatever for these players not participating in the combine? Because I think that's sort of an under talked about topic when it comes to the scouting combine every year.
Yeah, there's just so much certainty in the market right now, and it gives me like whenever that's true, like whenever everyone kind of assumes something is true, like the thing that I've kind of learned in Dynasty is like, okay, like if everyone assumes it's true, like there's a real chance to be profitable if that assumption is wrong. And everyone is locked in on Marvin Harrison Jr. being one. And so instantly, like my radar has been up to, well, is that, are we just saying it? Is he one because everyone just keeps saying it? Or is there real, is there something real there? And by the way, like my co-host, Chad Parsons, who I would trust like as, more than anybody to give me like a take on a player in terms of like having like concrete analysis and having studied time. He like his work on, on players and incoming players, like is like, incredible. Like it's, it truly amazes me. His production metric like neighbors more than Marvin Harrison. And and by the way, Lance Zierlein and some other guys like that have been in on neighbors ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. So the idea that it's like impossible is not, I just don't think that's true. I come back to like, I think one of two things is happening. There's a real chance that Marvin Harrison Jr. has been promised a pick. And I don't know, like that happens a lot in the NBA. Like we don't hear about it in the NFL, but it happens all the time in the NBA. And which team is now owned by NFL owners or NBA owners? The Washington Commanders, right? It's now owned by a basketball team or by the owners of a basketball team. So there's like some stuff in that range where you're like, okay, if the reason for him not participating is like, if we don't trade to 1, we are taking you at 2, right? I think that's a very possible thing that has happened because that would explain this. The other thing, like if he's not going in my reading, and I could be wrong, and maybe I am wrong, maybe the report's not right, but the way that I read the report is he's actually not going to be in Indianapolis. Like he's physically not going to be there. If he's not there, the medical reports, like the lack of medical reports is going to be a thing. And I don't like, we can sit here and say it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Like it to these teams, it's going to be a big deal. It's a multi-million-dollar investment. Like you're not sharing information with us. Why? Right. Like that. Any of us would say that, right? Like if we're hiring anybody, right. Can I do a background check on you? No. Well, why? Right. Like you're instantly going to think that, right? That's as you should be skeptical if you're hiring these people. So I think that he has either been guaranteed or he leaves himself open to be picked off by neighbors in a doomsday and in a way that, he might not have been, right? And why doesn't he want to run? Everyone wants to show off. Like, TikTok and Instagram and all these things, like everyone wants to show off. When someone doesn't want to show off, I'm like, like that's skeptical. Like I should be skeptical of that because why, right? If they don't want to show me, like, everyone wants to show you run fast and that's a thing that you got to be. My spidey senses are up in a way I didn't think it would be.
And this is something we'll come back to, right? And maybe after year 1 of Marvin Harrison Jr., wherever he lines up, and if he doesn't live up to expectations, we might be able to look back on stuff like this. Not as an end-all, be-all, because you're going to give a guy like Harrison much more than 1 season. But I think these are all valid points that we're bringing up and maybe making for people who are having their rookie drafts here after the NFL draft, especially in Superflex. Maybe that 105 is actually not looking like that bad of a pick here right now. Dynasty rookie drafts last year, tight ends just spoiled us, Jordan. We were spoiled by tight ends last year. Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, we're headlining it. You could make a case that Luke Musgrave, Michael Mayer towards the end of the season showed us showed out on this that they are going to be difference makers. Tucker Kraft maybe even to a certain extent as well. Is there another one I'm forgetting? Who am I forgetting?
No, Tucker Kraft was going to be the guy that I mentioned.
Okay, all right.
He's interesting.
So I guess in FFPC Dynasty leagues, tight end premium, 1.5 points per tight end. This is like a perfect storm when we talk about Brock Bowers because people have been wanting Brock Bowers to come to the NFL basically since he signed with Georgia. And he didn't disappoint with his numbers, right? I mean, I know he had the injury this past year or whatever, but now he is coming into the NFL in 2024 right off the cusp of, or not the cusp, but right off the end of a massive tight end year for rookies. How much caution do we need to be exercising with? As excited as we are to draft Brock Bowers in our dynasty leagues, how much caution do we have to be exercising based on what happened last year? We don't want to get too excited about that. And sort of like basically what rookie tight ends have done by and large prior to the 2023 season. I feel like it's exciting to talk about and exciting to think about, but when you're actually on the clock and Brock Bowers is staring you in the face, maybe we leave him at the altar, right?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I look at this and I come back to, does the production last year, right? Should that increase the way we think about Brock Bowers, or should it have no impact, or should it decrease the way we think about Brock Bowers? And I think, right, when you look at Kyle Pitts, I think one of the arguments for Kyle Pitts coming in, like about having him really high as like top 2 or 3 pick in Dynasty at tight end, was like there's nobody else, right? That's not true with Brock Bowers, right? With Brock Bowers, there's a lot of other guys, right? Like I would argue that tight end is very deep, and maybe there's some ceiling concerns about it right now. Like there was one tight end that had over 1,000 yards last year, right? Like that's not necessarily a great ceiling position right now. But if you're looking at guys and you're saying like, okay, there's a lot of diversity at the position. There's young guys, there's old guys, there's middle-aged guys. Right? There's a lot of good guys. There might be 10 to 15 guys you actually trust, and at a position where like for years it was like 5, so like that's a big difference. So I actually look at Bowers in the landscape of the position, and I think like it's harder for him to come in and go from being like tight end 4 or 5 in Dynasty to 1, because he's going to have to jump guys that are really good. Right. Yeah. So I think like whenever that happens, like when you have a couple of really good recent classes, I think it actually kind of decreases the value uptick opportunity of the rookies. And, that's kind of a thing that I'm, that kind of goes against them, as opposed to thinking like, oh, listen, the NFL's on a heater, or, all these tight ends, like they're better groomed for the position. Like, like it's probably just variance. And like, it actually makes their argument, to be up there in value, like harder. Right. So that's kind of the way that I look at him. Again, he's like a transcendent college player. Like, let's not like, of the guys, like I looked and did a study last year, like he's the only person that's like been like a Division I guy that's like led their team and receiving for 3 years, right? Like that's just stupefying, right? Like like that's almost impossible to do. Like you see, like Laporta did it. I think Laporta did it twice. Like I did a Laporta study last year, and it was basically that. And my argument was like Laporta could be the second best receiver on an awesome team, and that actually turned out to be true. Like Bowers absolutely has that, right? And I think like that's my test of like difference making tight ends. Bowers has that. Some of the other guys don't, or didn't last year. But I love Bowers, but I would be careful on like just assuming it's going to be a rollover of like the tight end tsunami we got last year, because I think it works against him.
It does, and that's my point. That's why I bring it up. With all due respect to Iowa, Brock Bowers did this at Georgia. The talent, rich offense and team of the Bulldogs, where they just get everybody there, and he led his team in receiving twice. And so I think there is a lot to be said for Bowers, especially in tight end premium formats. But we're going to exercise caution. Now, I don't want to turn this into like a total fear segment, but I do think it's worth bringing up the running backs this year. There's no Jahmyr Gibbs here. There's no Bijan Robinson here. There's Braylon Allen. There's Blake Corum. There's Trey Benson. There's guys here, but there's no guys, capital GUY in this draft. I think in rookie drafts, Jordan, we tend to focus on, especially when it gets to the end of the first round, early second round, on these running backs that, if granted the opportunity, they could be big year one. More often than not, they have better second years in the NFL. The question here regarding the running backs this season, the rookies, do we turn our focus to Brock Bowers and the receivers completely because there's nobody that wows us from a running back standpoint? How have previous rookie drafts, how have previous seasons dictated the proper way to handle rookie running backs in our rookie drafts? Because I feel like there's nobody to get super excited about now. And I feel like if I get excited about anybody in the next couple months, it's going to be because I'm just trying to find somebody. And that usually is wrought with peril to have that approach to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cautionary thing is when you're in a class that doesn't, kind of wow you, or, the concerns about this, like, you have to be very careful about drafting based on landing spot, right? Like, that's the risk in a lot of this, because again, like we just talked about with Bowers, like this is the exact opposite at the running back position. Like there's no good ones in this class. And so I'm not saying that there's no good ones. There's no like first round quality guys. Like there might not be like top 50 pick at running back position. Is kind of what we're seeing. Grinding the mocks is a great resource. They don't have a running back on their database right now because no one's in the top 60. Right. So like that's a concern, right? That's a concern. So I would caution, right, if you get a day 2 landing spot that appears good, like be very careful about what you do with that, right? Yeah. I think that people will want to elevate that because there's a shortage of guys this year, and that feels very much Bishop Sankey-ish.
Yes,
right? If you remember Bishop Sankey.
Oh yeah, Washington, baby.
Yeah. Yeah. And they went, I think 10, and then he bounced around a bit, and it was like, and then you had I think there was like a Jeremy Hill class, but like that was like, there was like that only had like really like one quality guy, and it really ended up being a bad class, right? And I think you got to be careful kind of paying up for that, for that position. So that's, I think, the thing that I'm attuned. Each year is different in terms of how the positions go to. Mm-hmm. But like this very much strikes at that, and I think the answer is like be very, very careful about what you're willing to spend up on.
Back to the receivers here for a second. Daniel Jeremiah, Move the Sticks, NFL Network. I haven't looked. I think he's done a second mock draft, but his first mock draft, I was blown away. And I only bring him up not because I think he's the end all be all. I mean, I do respect what he does, but I've never seen a mock draft like this. 2 rounds, Jordan. He had 14 receivers off the board in the first 2 rounds. Now, I look at that and I'm torn in 2 directions. One, I'm very excited as a dynasty player because I know if I have a high second round pick or maybe multiple first and second round picks, I'm going to get some really good replenishments at receiver for my dynasty team. The flip side of it is like, my God, there's no way there's going to be 14 receivers drafted in the first 2 rounds. That this is hyperinflation of the class, and I need to be careful how excited I am about it. I know you haven't delved deep into the receiver class yet this year, but if there is, I guess quarterback might be a strength here in this rookie class. But if it's not quarterback, it's got to be receiver because there is just a litany of different talents. The big 3 that we talked about, Harris and Neighbors, I'll throw Odunze in there as well. But, I mean, we could see 5 or 6 receivers in the first round again this year. It's baffling. How much have you looked into this, and what's your early assessment on Leap Day 2024 of this year's crop of pass catchers?
Listen, you said 14 in the first 2 rounds. Yes. Is that right?
Yep.
If there's 14 in the first 2 rounds, I will guarantee you I'm going to have a blast just trading down in rookie drafts because I am going to let people pick their favorite, and I'm going to be like, you know what? Like history's told us we don't get these decision rights. You pay for it. I'll take the vig, and we'll go from there. Right? That's kind of like and that's kind of my play on a lot of these things. It's funny because people be like, "Oh, you think you're a know-it-all?" I was like, I actually think I know nothing. Right? Like, let's assume
that's
what
you do
anything.
when you trade down. Like if you assume you know nothing, you trade down to have more chances at it. Keep going.
Correct. Yeah. I assume I actually know nothing. And then like, all right, well, now that we're sort of operating under that premise that nobody knows anything, or at least I am one of these people that know nothing. All right, well, how do I sort of capitalize on that? Right. And it's let other people pay, right? Let other people pay to make the uncertainty. And again, I think there's like a lot of randomness in how guys perform. And, I don't know if it's super predictable. Like there's a couple of metrics you can look at, but like a lot of the things don't correlate. And so like that leaves me to say like, Dan, who you mentioned earlier, like he had this great line one time we were talking, and it was like, you have to have humility. And it's like and that's the thing about it that to me, rookie drafts is like a really good example of like, don't get too convinced on anything, because like that will leave opportunities out there. And every time I've like had that happen, like it's tend to bite me more than it has been, that has been good. And again, like you go back through history on some of these things, and like if you had just traded down, like instead of taking Jalen Reagor, Jerry Jeudy, or whoever, and like it just said, I'll take the fourth guy, I don't care who it is, I'm going to take the fourth one. That fourth one would have been Jefferson, right? If you had done that from Burrow to Herbert, if you had traded down from like Burrow to Herbert, you could have landed Herbert and Justin Jefferson. It probably more in a trade down, right? Like those types of deals like that are out there. I'm very kind of open to that, especially when you get a large tier of the same position.
I think trade, like I've always had difficulty. I think a lot of people have the same philosophy as you do, Jordan. Like that they talk a big game. I really like this guy. I really like this guy. I'm going to go after this guy. I'm going to trade up for this guy. But when it comes down to it, they're like, I don't know. Maybe I'm going to stand pat, or maybe I'm going to trade down. I've had difficulty trading down, in my dynasty drafts, because I feel like everybody's onto that. Like, why put a significant amount of eggs in one basket? I don't know if I'm using this analogy properly. Why put a significant amount of eggs in one basket when I can have two baskets, and maybe I'm going to hit on like the Fabergé egg or something like that? I'm probably using this improperly. It doesn't matter. But you know what I'm saying.
You're saying.
You know what I'm saying. So
Absolutely
like that, and that's the thing. If everybody has that philosophy, then it becomes more and more difficult to trade down. But we have these elite talents this year in Caleb Williams, in Marvin Harrison, that might encourage some trade up. So it might work out that way as well. That's rookies. Last thing I want to get to this segment, and I'm going to go back to the veterans. Philadelphia Eagles last year, colossal collapse at the end of the season. There's a lot of people that think they know what happened. I don't know if anybody really does. But what I want to focus on is Jeffrey Lurie apparently, and this is reported, like in not so many terms, said, okay, Nick Sirianni, we're going to keep you on as head coach. You got to do something with these coordinators. And what did he do? He went out and he got Vic Fangio as his defensive coordinator and Kellen Moore as his offensive coordinator. A lot of people would say those are really splashy, exciting hires. I feel like you're a little bit bearish on the Kellen Moore hire. And while everybody might be excited about him for dynasty purposes, with Jalen Hurts, with AJ Brown, with Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, so on and so forth, I feel like you are not as excited. Can you tell us a little bit why?
He runs the ball too much. And when you look at, his track record, he leaves Dallas and then Dak Prescott has a career year. And by the way, if you listen closely to what Dak Prescott said, he dumped all over Kellen Moore. If you listen to what he said, and everyone wanted to listen to what McCarthy said, but if you listen to what Dak Prescott said, it was like he flamethrower to Kellen Moore on the way out, because he said basically, like we're in a really good rhythm and guys know where they're going, like under McCarthy, right? And if that's like if you're saying that, like that means, right, guys didn't know where they were going and we didn't have a plan, right, under the other guy is the conclusion to come to there. Like that's not great. And then he goes to the Chargers, and they have a really not good year. Again, not all that's his fault, but like he was a hot head coaching candidate. And now like we've seen him basically, we've seen, the effect of him be worse in two different places within the past, basically 2 years. That's my concern.
I think it's worth examining. The other thing that I think has people nervous about Dynasty is they don't know what's going on with AJ Brown. And I say they, I'm including myself in this, so I should be saying we, because I don't know what's going on with AJ Brown. I know that there was something that happened towards the end of the season, and it's something that we'll be following closely as we move forward, not only to the NFL draft, but through the offseason as well. Kev Wheeler, former co-host of the show, talking about my weird egg second basket thing. Shouldn't there be a goose with a golden egg in there somewhere? Yeah, I guess there should. Like that. That's what we're looking for, not the Fabergé egg, because that's that's like Barry Sanders. That's like Walter Payton. That's like LaDainian Tomlinson. A goose with a golden egg is less rare than the Fabergé egg, which we're just looking for a golden goose. Let's just face it. So we're dealing with goose eggs, excuse me. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I have been talking too much, and I want to get Jordan McNamara's analysis on why the Analytics of Dynasty Team Building Guide is a must for Dynasty players, and how, for people who have subscribed to it and gotten it before, how it has changed for 2024. Analyticsofdynasty.com's Jordan McNamara at McNamara Dynasty, my co-host here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. We got another 25 minutes to go. We're going to go hard. We're going to get through a lot of stuff. This is Dynasty 401. We've done Dynasty 101, 201 to a certain extent. We're getting into the 401. That's coming up next, exclusively on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.
If you're not playing Dynasty Fantasy Football right now, where we're still out there doing all sorts of trades and moves, everybody else that does like casual gamers that do redraft, they're done, and they're just kind of speculating or like talking about the draft. We're still playing. Like, if you play Dynasty, we play all year. I play over at FFPC. If you want to play there, use promo code COOP, C-O-O-P. We'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more at myffpc.com. And there's two ways to jump in over there. You can either do a startup, in which case you can get Dalton Kincaid way after guys like Sam Laporta and Trey McBride. Brock Bowers, I just saw that the rookie Brock Bowers, even before the draft, they're projecting him to go as like the tight end 2 in these startup drafts. Crazy, right? Like right after Laporta, which is nuts. Like, you can get Kincaid, or if you don't want to do a startup, I think this is even more fun. You go out and take over an orphan team, right? So over at FFPC, they never close the leagues down. They just take the teams, and if somebody has to leave or whatever, then you can buy in and take that team. So you can go find a team that has Kincaid and a bunch of players you like, and you keep those players, and then you look at all the other players you don't like, and you have the golden opportunity to trade them away. Like, it's so much fun to take a team and be like, okay, you know what? Because if you do a startup, you love all the guys already. Like, those are your babies. If you do an orphan team, then you can trade away all the guys you don't like, and that's even more fun, honestly. You have the golden, the green light there. So go to myffpc.com. Use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more, and you'll give you a leg up versus starting your own league. Now you got to chase people down for dues. You got to pay your own money. So go get set up over there.
The final segment for the Leap Day 2024 episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network is underway. Eric Balkman from the FFPC, Jordan McNamara, Analytics of Dynasty.com. Don't forget, I should bring this up too. The Fantasy Alarm All-Pro subscription is live right now. You can unlock content for all sports, including annual draft guides, one-on-one expert access in Discord. The League Sync function will allow you to analyze matchups and trends in your specific leagues. Integrated with Fanjections is the lineup generator as well. Daily and weekly rankings. You get the value vault, the position coaches, waiver wire ownership percentages, projection stats, and tools. Build better lineups guaranteed. Get access to everything Fantasy Alarm offers all year. Just use promo code LOCK, L-O-C-K, LOCK, at fantasyalarm.com/lock. Before we get into the Analytics of Dynasty team building guide, Jordan, I don't want to put you on the spot here. Is there any rookies that we have not discussed tonight that you have a take on right now in the early going, be it a quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, anything like that we haven't discussed? You're like, you know what? I should get my feelings put out there on this guy right now so everybody knows.
I suspect that this week will reveal something. right at the combine, right? I suspect that, and again, I would sort of caution. So the answer, I don't have a specific person, but I sort of have a specific thing that I'm kind of mindful for coming out of the combine is watch for the player that's perceptions really changed athletically. Make sure that translates to different draft pedigree, right? And then don't be tempted by it when you get in, if that lands a person in the first round, don't double count, right? Be very careful about double counting.
I think that's important. We don't talk about double counting enough, and it's something that I have to restrain myself with every single year in my rookie drafts. We kind of got into the content right away. We didn't really get into your background, which I don't think we got into last time you were on the show. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got in specifically to Dynasty Fantasy Football and then the birth of analytics of Dynasty.com, Jordan?
Yeah, I played fantasy for since probably like 96 or 97. I played baseball even before that. I played football, and that was like, call into, someone's answering machine, like era. Like you had to go to Blockbuster to get the internet, like type of like CD, like that was that era of stuff. So I'm aging myself a little bit here. But I played for a really long time. I was really into baseball for like most of my like early life. I did play football, but I was like more into baseball. And then actually, you mentioned earlier, I went to law school. I just couldn't play baseball anymore. I just didn't have the time.
Right.
And so, but I was spending time like in my dorm room on like Saturday nights, like trying to come up with like, adjusted ERA stats, which I'm not saying like there are what I was figuring out, but like that was the some of the baseball stats now was like some of the stuff that I was like trying to think about and solve for like 15 years ago. And so that stuff always interested in me. And then I got out of law school, and I was just told the story recently. I was living with my grandmother in her basement, which is actually where I studied for the bar. And then I got a job waiting tables before, while I was waiting for my bar results and to get sworn in. And so I literally lived in her basement and went and waited tables, and like I didn't know anybody. So I was living in Albany, New York, and I knew my grandmother and like a couple of relatives, like that was it. And so I was like, I got to figure out something like occupy my time. And I found Dynasty. And so that year I ended up, I think I went Julio, AJ Green, Des Bryant, and maybe Gronkowski was like my first 4 picks. Like I actually like did a really good job. I had no idea it was.
Wow.
And so,
I think you had some idea what you were doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it worked out. So like I really, and then it's a normal dynasty track, right? 1 turned into 2, turned into 4, turned into 10, turned into 30, right? Like that's a very kind of normal dynasty story that people will tell. And that's kind of mine. And so that's it. And then, I started creating dynasty content when it's a very specific story, actually. If you remember, it was like 2016, I think 2015, 2016, Kiaris Garrett was like a really big, he was actually a huge RotoViz recommendation back then, Kiaris Garrett. And if you're not familiar with Kiaris Garrett, I don't fault you. He never caught it past the NFL, didn't play. But he was a guy, I think he was out of Tulsa, actually a big body guy. I think he ended up getting drafted by Carolina, if memory serves, but never played. He went undrafted and never played. And then I think he got picked up as a undrafted free agent by Carolina. I took him at 206 in a rookie draft. And, I was like, I got my process about this rookie stuff that I totally did adjust to the draft. Like I know what I was doing enough to, and so I said, I'm not going to I need to figure out a better plan. And so I just started studying it, and I started studying it, and then I started working with Chad in like the fall of 16. And then I started writing a little bit after that. And then the first AOD book was, I think I started writing in 18, and then I released it in January 2019. And then each year it's been one. Actually, this is the first year I haven't done one. People have asked. It's a yearly thing that I release like early in the year. Just some family stuff kind of got in the way. When I wrote last year's Dynasty Team Building Guide, I thought that could be the end. Like when I put the final touches on that, I said that's like
You're like Larry David with Curb Your Enthusiasm. All right, that's it. That's the last season, and then you always come back for more. Essentially.
Yeah, and I didn't think like I didn't have more to write, but I was like I wanted to create like an evergreen strategy book that kind of told you how to do it from beginning to end, and I thought that did it. Right, I thought like I didn't was that like I didn't think I could actually do it again, right? Because I had done it. Right? That's what I did. Right, I thought with it. And like 5 or 6 years to make it happen. And that's the one that I finally kind of came down to. So I have thought about kind of updating it. But I've thought a lot about like doing an audio, like a kind of an audio project. I've thought about doing like a trade building guide. Like, I don't know. It's hard to talk about trades because you just start talking about your own trades is like, that's the hard thing about, writing about them or doing because you just start talking about your own trades. So I've like tried to figure out how to kind of navigate that. I am thinking about like an audio piece that I might like release, and it might end up being like next year. I don't know. I haven't quite figured that out yet. I do want to try something with like an audio book. Like that'd be something I want to try and just do it in like podcast form and basically make it, then it's kind of evergreen audio format. I think would be kind of a cool take on it. So I might do that still. I haven't ruled it out, but I'm not sure I'm going to write another one anytime soon.
Well, I'm curious because you're basically writing the same topics, like the same subject every single year. What kind of tweaks have you made to that team building guide? Because I feel like Dynasty, like it doesn't change. Like the goals are always the same, but I don't know. Maybe the talent pool, maybe differing strategies. I mean, like how does that change year after year? What are the tweaks that you have added?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I first started, it was start one, right? And so then it became super flex, right? And so that's like instantly there. When I first started, it was start one, no tight end premiums. Now everything's a tight end premium or not everything, but you get a lot of tight end premiums, right? And there's the start one non-tight end premium is becoming less common. Right. And so like kind of finding some things in there. I've looked at positions differently and there's like different stuff I'll find. Right. So a lot of my early work was like on specific topics. Right. So like one of the things like I was really interested in and I've kind of found is like consistency doesn't matter. Like consistency is like one of like the big findings I had in terms of like week to week consistency, like, team consistency, like the fact that it matters, like trying to solve for it, trying to like striving for it. Like none of that matters is basically the thing. So I just like rejected that as basically being a thing that I try. Right. So a lot of it was like topics like that. I would spend, 10, 15 pages kind of delving into it. But it was never really like a through line of like, here's basically a thing. Like it was more of like a topic. It was almost like a journal, right? It was almost like an academic journal was kind of like how the topics would go because there wasn't a through line. And then the Dynasty team building guide was kind of the aim of that was like, all right, let's do kind of like one thing. Like, let's try and go kind of beginning to end. And that was good. I started looking at players differently too. Like I started realizing more and more that floor didn't matter and it was all ceiling. That's one thing I learned. And so I started like viewing metrics differently, right? I started viewing like the kind of accomplishments that we were looking for differently. So that's one thing that really changed. And like, for example, like one of the things that I come to, and I have like a rule with my teams, if I have 4 top 30 guys in the format, like I'm probably going to get a bye, and it doesn't matter 5 through 20.
Right.
Yep. It doesn't matter because the top 4 drag you so far. That's something that I've learned, and Jordan 5 years ago, Jordan in the 2.0 version of AOD wouldn't have thought that. And Jordan now thinks that. And so I become like thinking about those things a lot more.
I think that's fascinating, by the way, because that should be a goal then, right? I always think of Glenn Lowy, longtime FFPC player, and he plays Dynasty too. And I had him on one of my shows. I don't know, God, this is probably 7 or 8 years ago. And I still have it in my mind to this day when it comes to Dynasty. It's one of the things that always stands out. And he told me elite talent over everything else. And that's really what it comes down to. You're trying to get the best of the best. And And I think, and this gets into trading, right? There are a lot of people, sometimes myself included on this. I feel like I have to win every trade. Do you feel that pressure that you have to win every trade? Because I feel like once you do, then you're afraid to make a mistake. You trade a lot less, and you cost yourself some pretty valuable assets because you're afraid to lose the trade. How do you feel about trying to win every trade that you're in, Jordan?
Well, I don't think you should set out to try and lose them, but I don't think you should be scared to lose them. Right. I don't think you should be scared to lose. I mean, in a 12-team league, 11 people are going to lose. Right. I mean, that's just you're going to lose more than you win. Right? It's okay. Your goal should be to try and accomplish an 8% outcome, right? 1 out of 12, right? That's your goal. And to do that, you have to take risk. To do that, you're going to lose. You're going to lose. You're going to not succeed. You're going to fail. Right. But you have to sort of be, I think more and more kind of pushing the envelope on aggression, right? Is something that I've really kind of strove for, is be very aggressive on getting elite players, right? Because depth doesn't matter. Elite players do. It's kind of something I really, anytime I hear people talking about depth, I'm instantly we're having the wrong conversation, right? We need to be talking about having, and honestly, it's really funny because people criticize my podcast with Chad. And the biggest complaint we get is you guys only focus on elite players. And I was you're darn right. We only focus on elite players, right? That's our trade focus is about trading for elite players. That's what we spend our time doing. And that's what we tell our people to do is focus on those trades that make a difference. And so that's and I didn't think that way, 4 or 5 years ago. I didn't think that way 2 or 3 years ago. It's become much more aggressive lately on that.
Here's something that I wrestle with, and I've gone back and forth on this over the last few years. Let's say you're taking over a dynasty orphan team, and it's orphan because it's not good. There's not a lot of assets on the team. In fact, let's just say the only elite asset on the team is CeeDee Lamb. So you have CeeDee Lamb, who you want to get. This is who you want to get on your teams. Two schools of thought here. One school of thought would say, okay, you're trying to get these elite players. You're trying to collect these elite players. Why would you ever entertain trading CeeDee Lamb for mystery boxes or guys that might not ever turn out? And then the other school of thought is, why wouldn't I trade CeeDee Lamb? I'm trying to get as many assets as possible that could hit. Yeah, I know CeeDee Lamb hit, but man, I got to rebuild this team. So I'm gonna trade CeeDee Lamb for draft picks. I'm gonna trade CeeDee Lamb for some second year guys or what have you. What's the proper way to sort of rebuild a dynasty team when you have only one or maybe two assets like that?
Yeah, I mean, I am very I think about it like building a fire. And so if you ever watch a fire burn, if you're building a fire and you got a fireplace, you're watching a fire burn, you don't put the kindling and you don't put the paper on top of the fire. Right? You don't burn it from the top, you burn it from the bottom. Right. And the reason why is because it burns up. Right. And all the it's going to burn the bottom stuff and it's going to burn up. I think the same thing about a dynasty team. You don't put the stuff on top and say, okay, we're going to burn it down from the top. You want to burn it from the bottom. Right. And that is to say, and that's hard. It's easier, honestly, to trade CeeDee Lamb. Right? It's easier to do that. Right. More people are interested in it. But just talking about what we just talked about, if your goal is 4 top 30 players and you trade away CeeDee Lamb, okay, now I've gone from 1 to 0, right? Now, I got to retrace my steps. It's going to be hard. Think about in a situation like that, I should be doing a couple of things. I should be kind of, trying to go, upgrading from, 2 top 100, 2 players at 150 overall to 75 is a huge jump, right? Kind of thinking about those types of jumps, right? I want to buy fear, right? I want to buy injuries. I want to buy suspension risks. I want to buy those players, right? I need my roster construction to be right? I need to be overweight at running back, right? In terms of just depth running back. And I need to embrace productive old players, right? I don't want to run from them. I need to embrace them. Because I can still compete with the Keenan Allens of the world can compete with CeeDee Lamb on a year-to-year basis. They don't compete with them in value and they don't compete with them long-term, but you can hold your own with like the Mike Evanses, the Amari Coopers, the Keenan Allens, the Locketts we mentioned earlier, like you can hold your own with those guys. And again, 2 or 3 players like can drag that team a long ways, right? Like I just think about like LeBron James. How many teammates has LeBron James had in all those things, right? He dragged so many players to championships, right? Like he's dragged so many people to the finals. It's like, I think, starters that he's dragged to finals, right? It's a lot of guys. And so like, that's the same thing in Dynasty, right? If you have 2 or 3 players, they can drag you a long way. And that's, I think, that's kind of the lesson that I've learned.
Bill Hollywood in the chat. We do have a couple of minutes on, he wants to talk about Demario Douglas. We go from the elite of the elite to Demario Douglas. So as far as him and Dynasty goes, I liked what I saw last year. I also didn't invest a ton in him in many of my leagues. Yep. And I know New England's a team in flux, new head coach, new offensive coordinator, knew a lot, probably a new quarterback there this year as well. And Demario Douglas, I don't know what to think. To me, like I have him on like 1 or 2 leagues. I'm probably holding him. I'm not going out and actively seeking him for sure. How do you feel about him?
I feel that way. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's super likely that he's an elite player or anything like that. I mean, 1.7 yards really good. 23% target per route, really good. So those are good numbers. The scoring wasn't great because some of the touchdown stuff, and again, like it wasn't that great in terms of like the overall volume and counting stats on the season. But you look at some of the efficiency stuff, like it's intriguing. I wouldn't place like a ton of value on him as an asset, though.
Okay. All right. Last thing I want to go out with here. Tell us about analytics of dynasty.com. What's it about? What makes it different from a lot of the other sites out there?
Well, every day I release a podcast. That's really the calling card of it, is every day, 8 o'clock in the morning, or, just assume that my computer network, the card doesngoing break, right? Assuming that that doesn't happen, which actually happened on Monday. Assuming that doesn't happen, or Tuesday, I guess, Tuesday morning, you're going to get a podcast every morning, right? And just talking different strategies, right? Right now we're talking veteran players. Today's every Thursday it's a trade show. Friday it's a news dump. Tomorrow's going to be great in terms of the podcast. I'm really excited to record it. A lot of combine stuff, covering the draft, right? We'll cover rookies every day. I think last year I did 2 years ago I did 350. I think last year I did right around the same number in terms of podcasts for the year. I don't do one every day during the season. It ends up being like 7 or 8 a week, but it just is a little different flow. But yeah, I mean, it's strategy, right? You can join us in our group chat as well. I've got a trade database finder. I have dynasty tiers. My hierarchy of assets, really like the kind of the culmination of like all the AOD team building guide. Like I have that on my website, and that's kind of thinking about players in a lot of the ways that we talked about tonight. So you can go find that. It's all at analyticsofdynasty.com. And then again, if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at McNamara Dynasty. And I'm always having some fun replies from people in the Twitter sphere.
Your X timeline is super entertaining.
And I'll be honest, it's funny because the best thing is I actually went into my group chat today and I literally pasted, someone made a derogatory comment, and I literally posted the tweet in the group chat, and then I just posted a message of what I wanted to respond, and I said, there, I got it off my chest. So go ahead and find us in the group chat and you'll get even more content about x.com/McNamara Dynasty, x.com/Dino Think Tank as well. The Dynasty Think Tank podcast. I make it a big part of my week every single week. You and Chad Parsons, fantastic Dynasty stuff on there as well. And are you still contributing to Football Guys as well? I am. Yeah. I haven't written a lot because kind of my other job has taken over some of like that time, but I do write. I wrote for Football Guys a ton last year. I haven't written anything really this offseason, but I will as the season kind of gets kicking off. And I have a couple of things that I do each week there. And yeah, I mean, they're a great team, right? I love working with all those guys over there. First, I just won Fantasy Writer of the Year, like totally deserved.
You did.
It. Like
absolute
inspiration for a lot of my thinking and stuff like that. So I'm really proud of him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm proud of how this show went tonight. Thank you so much, Jordan McNamara.
Yeah, man, it's always great to be with you. This is like one of my favorite stuff.
It's so much fun. Every time we'll have you on again real soon. You enjoy the combine. Keep up all the great work and have a fantastic weekend, Jordan.
Thank you.
That is Jordan McNamara Dynasty on the X. I want to thank him. I want to thank our producer, Matt Deutsch. We're back 7 o'clock next Thursday until 9. Destination Debbie and Dynasty Trades in 5. Scott Connor will be my co-host. Go to myffpc.com. Play on that Fantasy Pros Championship for $1 million grand prize, $6 million prize pool. myffpc.com. You're home for both never too early best ball tournaments, which you can enter for either $35 or $125, and you have the opportunity to win $25,000. Both those leagues will shut off prior to the NFL draft on April 25th. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Dynasty Orphans there, some as low as $1. myffpc.com, myffpc.com is where to go for that. For Jordan McNamara, I'm Eric Balkman. The Best of the Better Sports Network is up next. Thanks so much for watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Talk to you again next week.